this weekend.
Just gives you some idea of the amount of work that goes on in Grand Prix racing, and those sort of decisions, not easy decisions to make. I mean, they had the advantage yesterday. We've seen the two Williams Renaults take the front row of the grid, and yet they've decided to go away from what they had.
Ben, I think the reason for that is twofold. One is a concern about reliability. They want the points. The team want the points. But secondly, the performance that we saw Damon Hill put in just a week ago at Silverstone was so crushing. But they don't think that that performance has appeared here. They expected to have maybe a full second advantage over everybody. And in that case, I think they may well have taken the chance. But because the grid positions and times are much closer than that, they're saying, oh, let's err on the side of caution and go for what we know will do the job.
Well, there is Mika Hakkinen with that McLaren Mercedes, and as John has just mentioned, all different in the McLaren camp today, and this is going to be probably for them a vital warm-up session. It's only half an hour, and they're going to have to try various different cars. Remember, they can drive their spare cars during this warm-up session. It's the only time of the weekend, apart from if they need it in the race. And look at that, he very nearly put that one into the barrier somewhere.
Well, he rode the curb on the exit of the left-hander, and the car snapped back. But Mika Hakkinen probably going to be the busiest driver here in this 30-minute session. He's got to find out, as we look at one of, I think, two Pacifics creeping around on the side of the circuit, they've got to get answers very quickly. This is probably not going to be a car with race distance fuel. They want to know what are the time differences between MP410B and MP410C. Mika Hakkinen is in MP410B, we believe, at this point, and Mark Blundell will be in the C version. So, as soon as we get times, we'll bring you them.
Well, Mika Hakkinen, let's see whether he actually goes round and completes a lap. He may well do, because they don't have much time to do much in the way of installation laps here today, and it looks to me as though he is going to go straight ahead and set a time, and that just gives you an idea of how tight for time they're going to be in terms of the half an hour. A 1:26.220.
Of course, the circuit, having been unused since the Formula 3000 event yesterday afternoon, and of course team is going out onto the track, picking up speed literally, but the track itself will gain time as this session progresses. But it'll be the feedback that Mika Hakkinen will tell the team. He will know literally within the space of almost going through the first corner on his out lap whether this version of the MP410 McLaren chassis is the way to go here this afternoon, or maybe the 10C is not as bad as they believed. But those are questions that are vital for the team to find out as quickly as possible, so as they then can focus on what car they're going to provide Mika Hakkinen and Mark Blundell with.
It's ironic, isn't it? He had his first podium of the year in the last outing at Monza, finished in second place. Then they arrive here with the revised car, which they hoped would be producing that better performance, and yet we see them qualifying such a long way down, 13th and 12th for the two cars.
I think the problem lies with the revisions, the mechanical and aerodynamic revisions on the 10C car. And it appears that those two revisions are not working together. Now, that can happen, and normally those problems are resolved privately in testing. But because McLaren have worked so hard to get this new car here to Estoril, to give the team a chance to be more competitive, to get on the podium, maybe to win a Grand Prix this year. So the results that they had from the running they did earlier in the week at Silverstone, they felt, well, inconclusive, but let's go with it. You've got to take chances sometimes. The team did take the chance. It so far hasn't paid off, but come this afternoon, we have to wait.
So, Mika Hakkinen, a 24.189, and look at that, problems there for Andrea Montermini.
And that looks like a front hub bearing. We've seen a spate of hub bearing failures in Monza, and that, to me, either that or quite simply the wheel nut itself has become detached or certainly loosened, but something causing that front wheel to wobble around in a way that brought Montermini back into the pits very, very gently indeed.
Jean Alesi now out on track in the Ferrari.
And of course, just thinking back to when we were on board with Mika Hakkinen, the car we saw creeping around, in fact, probably was Montermini, and therefore that problem has started literally as the car went down the pit lane. He crept back, so more than likely it was a wheel not properly secured.
Well, we're seeing quite a lot of track action now. Damon Hill's just come out onto the circuit in his T car as well, and important experimentation for the Williams team. That time that Mika Hakkinen has done, by the way, 24.189, it's about a second slower than he did in qualifying. His fastest time in the 2 qualifying sessions, remarkably, said on the Friday, he was one of the few, only 2 drivers didn't improve. I think in that qualifying, it was just him and Taki Inouye.
And I think also it was the first time that we saw Mark Blundell actually out-qualify teammate Mika Hakkinen in this 1995 season. So really one of the worst days, I think, in the year for Mika Hakkinen. And of course the team supporting their drivers absolutely at the maximum of their potential. And believe me, whatever it takes McLaren to do, and by flying down a car overnight, that's the commitment that that team has made since 1981 to Grand Prix racing.
Well, Ferrari's not quite as on the pace as they would have hoped, particularly Jean Alesi ending up down in 7th place on the grid. So it's going to need one of his electrifying starts, perhaps, to really challenge up front in the early part of the race. Gerhard Berger just behind him, but he's qualified on the 2nd row, remember. And
Damon Hill, he's now gone quickest on his 3rd lap, and remember that also both the Williams chassis are at Monza specification. There is Damon Hill. There you can see at the back of the car, just very quick glimpse of those very low, located upper suspension arms. They're aerodynamic in profile. The purpose of those was basically on a 1994 design when Adrian Newey, who is responsible for the aerodynamic side of the Williams race team, came up with this philosophy, this concept. There again, look, just down level with the gearbox. So confirmation that Damon Hill is running the Monza setup on the back end of his car.
Very interesting movements then within the teams so far this weekend, and well, of course, they've still got to decide what strategies to run in the race itself. Hill quick straight away, 23.4. That's, well, it's about 7/10 of a second faster than Mika Hakkinen did on his first flying lap. So Damon Hill looking quick once again. Was very fast in the 2nd free practice session yesterday morning and set a time much faster than David Coulthard at that point. But Coulthard then switching to Damon Hill's setup and then going on to take the pole position in the afternoon. Hill about to cross the line. Let's see if he goes any faster this time. Yes, he does, at 23.047. There's still some way to go in this warm-up. Welcome back once again to Estoril for the morning warm-up session. Damon Hill has just come back into the pits. He's about to switch to his race car. And meanwhile, David Coulthard is on circuit. He's 3rd fastest. Damon Hill still fastest on a 23.047, and that's the 2nd fastest than anyone else. Mika Hakkinen next up, then Coulthard, then Gerhard Berger and Martin Brundle, 5th fastest. We saw Martin yesterday, a little disappointed with qualifying. Felt that he could have gone better than he did. He felt that a possible 3rd row position was on the cards, and in fact he was a little further down than that in the end. So Martin Brundle hoping for good tactics in the race to bring him back up the order. Now we've got a guest in the Eurosport commentary box once again this morning in the warm-up, and it's not a Formula 1 man as so much as an IndyCar man. Nick Guzet, who is the managing director of Penske Cars, based in Poole in Dorset, and responsible for the manufacture of the cars that last year, of course, dominated the IndyCar scene. This year, Nick, things didn't go quite so well, and yet Alonso Jr., of course, towards the end of the championship race, really had a very real chance of taking the title.
Yes, he did. I'm afraid to say that we probably slept a bit long over the winter months and didn't give the team quite the car that we should have done to start off the season. And, of course, we had that very unfortunate experience at Indianapolis, whereby we didn't qualify whatsoever. But towards the end of the year, the team had pulled together extremely well and given Al in particular a very strong chance. And he's a very much a fighting racing driver and performed remarkably in the latter half of the season. Very close.
Now, you haven't been to a Grand Prix for a little while. Just tell us how long it's been and what's brought you back here for this weekend.
Well, my last Grand Prix was with John when he was driving with us in the Penske when we were doing Grand Prix. This was in 1976. The American Grand Prix was the last period. Apart from a brief trip to Formula 1 test days, I've never been to a Grand Prix seat. This was a present from Murray Walker, my 50th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and which was a treat by him and the BBC staff, and it's been a remarkable experience. And I can honestly say I've never enjoyed myself at a race meeting so much in 32 years.
Well, we're just taking a look at Mark Blundell, and he, as Mika Hakkinen, busy and trying to sort out through which setup of car they're going to run. He's down in 9th place at the moment, still Hill fastest, Hakkinen still 2nd. We haven't seen Hakkinen come back out yet, well, not just yet anyway. A connection between Penske and McLaren in a way, the same major sponsor. Is there any connection in any other way between McLaren and Penske?
Not really yet. They've recently taken on the Penske shock absorber. They were having difficulties earlier on this season, and Penske were brought in and we developed a shock absorber for them. This has made some improvement. There's plenty of opportunity for this to happen. We're certainly talking to each other at some length. Perhaps more on the marketing side, where there's more opportunity through our joint sponsors. The technology between Formula 1 and Indy cars is perhaps more in the suspension area than anywhere else. Formula 1 cars seem to be much more dedicated to each and every track, whereas, of course, we go to every track with a setup, but then we work with it, trying to chase the track and chase the car. Whereas these teams here have very limited time on the track, and they have to come here with pretty much a setup that they're going to stay with very few alterations during the course of the period.
Normally, but in this case with McLaren this weekend, it seems to be slightly different.
Well, absolutely. In that respect, McLaren's no different than Penske or vice versa, and probably any of the top teams, that you really have to do whatever it takes to get competitive. And I feel very sorry for them, because having had that experience at Indianapolis this year, we know how deflating it is when you're working so hard and you've got your eye off the target, and they have worked enormously hard this weekend. Their experience will come back. They're a brilliant team. And they will win again, and I hope it will be fairly soon.
Well, we're riding with Johnny Herbert once again, that onboard camera. As you can see, he's fourth fastest. What you may ask of teammate Michael Schumacher, well, he's completed 5 laps and he's sixth fastest at the moment, and something like 2 seconds off the pace that Damon Hill has done. Now, of course, they're all running to strategies already in this warm-up as to what strategy they'll be running in the races. Part of IndyCar racing is to make pit stops, but in IndyCar racing, it's a little bit more known as to how many pit stops you're going to make. In Grand Prix racing, it's a bit more unpredictable.
Yes, virtually in the 200-mile races, we're going to have 2 pit stops. The 500-mile races would have as many as 8 pit stops, and we sort of fence with each other. There are some races where fuel is perhaps not quite such a priority, whereby you can sometimes get away with 2 or 1 as opposed to 2 or 3. And it is as much strategy in our type of racing as Formula 1, but again, these guys start off with very less fuel. We always run with full tanks in our car to start the race, and we just have to gamble that the race is going to be interrupted by some yellows and give us a chance to race if it's a fuel-efficient race.
So, Johnny Herbert still down there, but Mika Heinz Harald Frentzen, yes, has now moved up to 3rd place. So it's Hill, Hakkinen, Frentzen, and Frentzen, who put in a superb job in qualifying yesterday to end up in 5th place on the grid, his best effort of the year. And indeed, they may well change their strategy. Normally, they're a team that tends to go for just a one-stop race, because he's normally further down the grid, but they do have good reliability. They've shown that, and pretty good race pace in the past as well. But Frentzen himself may well change that policy today and perhaps go for 2 or 3 stops. Just briefly, Nick, what are the main differences you come to a Grand Prix race compared with an IndyCar race?
Well, the lack of activity, I have to say, because of the lack of time the truck drivers are allowed on the track, the engineers have to predict very much what the car setup going to be before they get to the circuit, and therefore the cars seem to be sitting still most of the time. With an Indy car, which has an infinitely more adjustable suspension, we are constantly working on cambers and toes, and the driver will go out for 1 or 2 laps, come in, adjust something. With these guys, they don't do that.
Well, we can see Hill still fastest. Hakkinen has improved his time quite considerably to go still 2nd fastest, but look, it's just 0.2 of a second slower than Hill. Frentzen is 3rd, then Coulthard, Herbert and Berger, and Schumacher has been pushed down to 7th, but he's only done 5 laps. And the likes of Hill and Hakkinen have both done 7 laps, and Schumacher looks as though he's just come out onto the circuit once again. So behind him, Brundle, Irvine, Barrichello and Panis. Mark Blundell is down in 12th place at the moment. But whatever Mika Hakkinen was running just then in that last lap, it seems to be working pretty well for them. Of course, again, we don't know how much fuel's on board. The team able to calculate very accurately how much fuel makes how much difference in terms of lap times. So they will have a very clear idea of how the car is responding. Welcome back to Estoril, the morning warm-up, and Michael Schumacher just about to cross the line, 7th fastest at the moment, and he remains 7th fastest. Consistent times around the 1 minute 25 second barrier, but the car's still sliding around quite a lot. What do you make of this one, John?
Well, I would say that Michael Schumacher has got a fair amount of fuel on board, and that's an area where the Benetton team, I believe, have got more flexibility. But also, he's probably running on the oldest of his 7 sets of tyres.
Well, there is Heinz Harald Frentzen in 3rd place in the Sauber Ford, and well, he's probably going to have to work a little bit differently in this morning warm-up to what he normally does, because the strategy is likely to be different for him this time.
And more to the point, so are the Sauber team, because to start on the front 3 rows of a grid alters your philosophy. You're thinking about, how do I approach a Grand Prix in Estoril? Now, they may have been thinking, well, we'll try and do X number of stops, or X singular. Now they may have to think of multiple stops, and that is a culture shock to a team that, you know, by definition, its place amongst the teams is always around the 5th to 7th team in the grid. So suddenly now they're up to being 3rd, and how they're going to approach this race is more, I would say, of a problem for the team than it would be for Heinz Harald Frentzen, because there's nothing better for a driver to see as much fresh air ahead of you as you can. And by being on the 3rd row and getting away with the 2 Williams and Schumacher and the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger, that's going to be a great way to approach the Portuguese Grand Prix.
So the Sauber team likely to be working a fair bit harder this afternoon with more stops, and it looks as though he must have been running fairly light to do that time, a 23.7, and he's only 7/10 of a second slower than Damon Hill. So it would certainly look as though they're investigating that sort of strategy. It looks as though we've got one of the Tyrrells off. That's the car of Ukio Katayama, and this is a replay of what happened, just lost it basically, and we've seen that from the Tyrrell, the back end sliding virtually all weekend.
Yeah, they've really had a big problem finding traction and grip under power, and there's a pretty clear example of how easy, once the car breaks away, once that adhesion is broken, it just continues its wayward path into the gravel trap.
David Coulthard, 4th fastest at the moment. Let's see whether there's any improvement on it this time around.
Well, Coulthard, 1 minute 25.452, about a second slower than his previous best. But the question I would like to ask Nick Guzet, Managing Director of Penske Cars, who's in the booth with us this morning, this car, Nick, next year is going to be driven by compatriot of IndyCar racing, Jacques Villeneuve, son of Gilles Villeneuve, will join the team, and in fact he's already integrating into the team, testing at various Grand Prix circuits. Now there's a different philosophy in IndyCar, particularly on the road circuits, the car setup to current Formula One technology. How do you think Jacques Villeneuve will be able to assist, maybe enhance Williams, the Williams team, with the knowledge of their IndyCar style racing?
Well, my understanding of this is a Grand Prix car is designed very much more with aerodynamics in mind. The suspension, when it comes to the track, is set. There's virtually no adjustment they can do on it. Of course, Jacques will be used to having a car that is multi-adjustable, and we work with shock absorbers and all the settings of the wheels. And I think that he will work with the engineers and perhaps Williams will change the way they design the car, so it becomes a sort of multi-function car as opposed to just aerodynamic design.
I mean, looking at a Williams, we see it's very low to the ground, very little suspension travel. So David Coulthard comes into the pits, and it's the completion of another run, and he may have time to get back out in a moment or two. So David Coulthard in for a brief moment, and Damon Hill goes out. But Nick, on this subject of shock absorbers, we normally don't get into too many deep technical discussions on Eurosport, but what is the function of a shock absorber in a Formula One context?
Well, these cars have very little suspension movement. As I say, it's only about 15 millimeters. Of course, we run in much greater amounts than that. Our drivers have tremendous control over their suspension. They can adjust the softness of the car through the anti-roll bars. They can also adjust the shock absorbers from the car. So they're actually working throughout the race and making mechanical adjustments, as I understand it. And I'm not particularly familiar with all the ins and outs of the Grand Prix car. The drivers have very limited amount of control actually on these cars. So it may be that Jack can bring with him the knowledge and the understanding of what it takes to set up an Indy car, and maybe apply some of that into the more technical side of the Grand Prix car.
Well, you've told us that the Marlboro McLaren Mercedes-Benz team are running Euro shock absorbers. Jacques Villeneuve has raced cars not on Penske shocks So you think that that knowledge is going to be a step upwards for Williams, and therefore the team will gain an advantage over other teams in Formula One?
Well, actually, Williams is our longest-serving Penske shock absorber Formula One customer. They've been running our shock absorbers in the main since about 1984. So they probably have more knowledge about the Penske shock and how it affects their car than any of the current Grand Prix teams. McLaren's are new to this, but Ferrari and Jordan's are long-term customers as well. But they're all individually tailored to the cars, and the engineers they arrange their own different damping systems with our Penske shock company. It's quite unique to each team, and I'm sure the information that Jack brings with him, he'll be able to tailor the shock absorbers for Williams, and maybe they'll take it from there.
Well, certainly I think everybody in Formula One looks forward to Jacques Villeneuve's first Grand Prix, which is going to be in Australia, in Melbourne, the new venue for the Australian Grand Prix on the 10th of March. And Nick Guzet, many thanks, and of course my friendship with the Penske team is a very personal one. 19 years ago, I was given the opportunity to win my first Grand Prix in Austria, and it still remains Penske's sole Grand Prix win.
So, on board with Mika Hakkinen, still second fastest, the 23.340, and he's just come back out again in another car, and it's difficult for us to tell which car he's trying when. They all look very similar, although they're running different specifications between the race car and the spare car, as McLaren try and make the decision as to what car to run this afternoon. Heinz Harald Frentzen still third, Coulthard fourth. We were watching Rubens Barrichello a moment ago. He's in fifth place. And behind him, Johnny Herbert, then Gerhard Berger, and Michael Schumacher seems quite content down in 8th position.
I'm reading no significance whatsoever into Michael Schumacher's 8th place, because the Benetton Renault team are ultimately the masters of race strategy, and Michael Schumacher is the best race driver out there. And we've seen on so many occasions this year, he's been able to drag a performance in the race out of the car, and has been flattered, or complimented, not flattered, by the work that the team do and the ability for the team to adapt and adjust to the requirements of whatever is going on the circuit. So the fact that Schumacher is down in 8th, I wouldn't worry.
Mika Hakkinen has improved his time once again. He's done a 23.129, and that's just a few thousandths of a second now, slower than Mika Hakkinen, than Damon Hill rather. And it looks as though they're finding their way a little bit, but how much fuel have they got on board? And we just don't know that story.
Also, I mean, that time Hakkinen has just recorded is almost identical to his best in qualifying over 2 days. So in the space of, what, 27.5 minutes, he's virtually at the point it took him 2 days to get to. So whatever the changes, whatever decision-making was made last night within McLaren, certainly Mika Hakkinen, I think, may step out of that car, whichever, B or C or an amalgam of both, with a little bit more hope for this afternoon's race.
Also in the 23s is Jean Alesi. He's fourth fastest. No, he isn't. He's just been pushed back because Gerhard Berger has just gone fastest. Berger fastest in the Ferrari at 23.037. We saw a strong race performance from Ferrari in Monza after they hadn't qualified that well. I wonder if we're going to see the same here today.
Well, to me, this Grand Prix is about one thing, and it's those round black objects at each corner of a Grand Prix car. It is tyres. And it's the ability for a team and a driver to use the tyre as efficiently and not abuse the tyre. But of course, when a Grand Prix starts, everything changes. It is so difficult to control yourself. The person who I keep referring back to, who is probably best at doing that, is Michael Schumacher. And that's the reason why Michael Schumacher, who's actually dropped down one more place to 9th, I've got no concerns about that particular time this morning.
He is back out again, Schumacher, so we may well see some improvements from him in the dying moments of the session. We've only got just over a minute until the checkered flag comes out, but Gerhard Berger, former winner here, and going fastest in this warm-up session. Jean Alesi back in 6th place. Still good performances there from Heinz Harald Frentzen, still in 5th position. Johnny Herbert's in 8th, then Schumacher, then Martin Brundle is in 10th place. I think we've seen everybody managing to come out. Yes, everybody has set a time this morning.
And having just set fastest lap, Gerhard Berger back into the pits, and we've got, well, just under 40 seconds remaining, so he's had enough for the morning, and that'll see Gerhard Berger with that. Unusual helmet design. That was the result of a competition run in an Italian newspaper sponsored by Marlboro. And the winning design encompasses the flags of every nation that hold a Grand Prix. And Gerhard Berger had planned to run it only on the Friday morning session, but he was so happy with it, he's kept with it all weekend.
So back into the garage for him. He won't be doing any more running. There's only 8 seconds until the checkered flag comes out. And we wonder whether anybody else will beat that time in the remaining stages. David Coulthard perhaps could do if this lap is a good one, because he's come round before hitting the checkered flag, down in 4th place at the moment at 23.6. That's just over half a second slower than Gerhard Berger's time. The traffic there, and John, that's also going to be a feature here today, because overtaking is not easy here.
Not at all. There are a couple of points on the circuit where you can pass. One is at the end of the straight, and the other is on the interior straight that leads down into the interior parabolica. But both are very easily defended, and both are also affected by the corners that lead on. For example, here you see that very fast exit onto the straight. You cannot really get too close to the car ahead of you, because it affects the front downforce of your car and causes the front to wash wide.
So Gerhard Berger, it looks as though he's going to complete this session as the fastest. Just the last few cars are crossing the line now, but that's 23.037. Mark Blundell's off into the gravel trap, and that's a disappointment. He'd come out in the second car just a few minutes ago and was no doubt pushing hard to see just what time he could do. He'd only been 14th fastest in the previous car, but unfortunately he's put it into the gravel, so they won't really know just how quick it could have been unless he had some good split times up to that point.
Well, all that information, of course, is available to the teams, and at any part of the circuit they can determine where a car change has improved or deteriorated its performance. But clearly the decision will be, will they run Mark Blundell in M10C or M10B? And that's a decision that will be, I would think, in process very shortly indeed. But of course, Mark Blundell, if they do choose to put him into the B-spec car, will have had little time in that car on the Estoril track, and then initially that may be a slight disadvantage. Of course, the driver does respond very quickly to any improvement, and I think that Mark Blundell would do so.
So there you see the times. Berger fastest, ahead of Hill and Hakkinen in 3rd, then Coulthard, Frentzen, Alesi, Barrichello, Herbert and Schumacher down in 9th place. Martin Brundle in 10th position, and it looks as though the Benettons must have been running quite a bit of fuel on board during that warm-up session. That'll get all the teams thinking as to what Benetton's tactics are going to be. Eddie Irvine and Olivier Panis next up. Jean-Christophe Bouillon, Mark Blundell in the gravel at the end. Mika Salo, Taki Inoue, Ukio Katayama, Luca Badoa, Max Papis and Pedro Lamy. The top 20, and then the last 4, fairly common really. Pedro Diniz, Andrea Montermini, Roberto Moreno, who's trying that semi-automatic box in the 40 Ford for the first time. They may even run it in the race today. And Jean-Denis Delatraz, a little closer to the pace, much closer in fact than he has been all weekend. So Delatraz getting a little more used to a Formula 1 car again. Coulthard being pushed back into the pits, and the final running done before the race gets underway. The race itself, of course, will be starting our coverage of it at 1:30, and that's the same in Europe as it is in Britain.